We put an incredible amount of trust in healthcare professionals, especially the ones who care for the most vulnerable people imaginable. But what happens when that trust is completely shattered? Today, we're going to break down the absolutely chilling case of Lucy Letby, a neonatal nurse who was right at the heart of a series of unbelievable tragedies. And to really understand the gravity of this story, we're actually going to start at the end with the powerful words of the presiding judge. This one phrase, a gross breach of trust, it just cuts right to the absolute core of this case. It's about the betrayal of the most sacred responsibility a person can have. So, let's go to where this all happened, the Neonatal Intensive Care Unit, or NICU, at the Countess of Chester Hospital. Now, this is a place that's supposed to be all about hope and healing. It's a world of incubators, of monitors, where the tiniest, most fragile infants are fighting for their lives, and where parents put all their faith into the hands of the people caring for them. And at the center of this world was Lucy Letby. And from the outside looking in, she seemed like the perfect professional. Her colleagues described her as diligent, quiet, friendly. Exactly the qualities you'd hope for in a nurse caring for newborns on the very edge of life. So the big question is, how do you go from that seemingly dedicated nurse to a convicted killer? Well, this timeline shows how it was this slow, awful tragedy unfolding over years. Letby joins the hospital back in 2011, but the crisis really kicks off in 2015 with this sudden, really alarming spike in infant collapses. What's truly shocking, though, is the delay. It takes another 2 years before the police even begin a formal investigation, and a full 8 years from when things started going wrong to a final verdict. The first red flags, they didn't come from a police report. They started as these quiet, anxious conversations between senior doctors on the ward. They started connecting the dots, seeing a deeply disturbing pattern emerge from all the chaos. When certain babies suddenly and inexplicably collapsed, one nurse was always there. And when they actually looked at the data, the picture was just chillingly clear. When Lucy Letby was on the ward, doing her nursing duties, the rate of unexpected infant collapses shot up. But when she was moved to administrative work, away from the babies, the incidents just stopped completely. That stark contrast was the evidence the doctors just couldn't ignore. Okay, so they see this horrifying pattern. But, seeing it is one thing. Getting the hospital leadership to actually do something about it, well, that turned out to be a whole other battle. The doctors' attempts to raise the alarm were met with a total wall of resistance. And this is where the story takes a just deeply troubling turn. The very system that's supposed to protect patients, it failed. The doctors' urgent warnings were brushed aside. And incredibly, hospital administrators actually turned on the doctors, accusing them of creating a hostile environment. And get this, they even demanded that the doctors apologize to the very nurse they suspected of harming children. So, with the hospital's own internal processes failing to protect its most vulnerable patients, the doctors' concerns finally broke through the hospital walls. And that triggered a massive police investigation and a trial that would completely grip the nation. In 2017, the Cheshire Police started this absolutely monumental task, one of the biggest medical crime inquiries in UK history. Investigators had to meticulously sift through thousands upon thousands of medical records, looking for clues. Letby was first arrested in 2018, but the case was so complex that it took another 2 full years before she was formally charged. And the trial that followed was a marathon. We're talking nearly 10 months long. Its length really just shows you the staggering amount of complex medical evidence they had to get through, and of course, the heartbreaking number of victims whose stories had to be told. So inside the courtroom, you had these two completely opposite stories. The prosecution painted a picture of a calculating nurse, someone who methodically harmed infants, using her specialist knowledge to attack them in ways that wouldn't leave obvious traces. Meanwhile, the defense argued she was a scapegoat, just a convenient person to blame for bigger, systemic failings and unsafe conditions at the hospital.
But, one of the most haunting pieces of evidence to come out of the trial was a series of handwritten notes they found at her house. The prosecution presented them as basically a confession, with these chilling phrases like, "I am evil, I did this," and "I killed them on purpose." Now, the defense said these were just the anguished writings of a woman under a lot of stress, but those words became an unforgettable, powerful part of the trial.
So after 10 grueling months of testimony, after weeks of deliberation, the jury was finally ready. And their verdict? Well, it sent absolute shockwaves through the entire British healthcare system. The verdict was just devastating. Lucy Letby was found guilty of murdering 7 babies. But that wasn't all. The jury also found her guilty of attempting to murder 7 other infants, revealing the true, horrifying scale of her crimes. For these crimes, Letby received what's known as a whole life order. And it's so important to understand just how rare and severe this sentence is. It's reserved for only the most monstrous crimes, and it means she will die in prison. There is no possibility of ever being released. So the conviction wasn't the end of the story, not by a long shot. It was really just the beginning of a massive fallout. The UK government immediately launched a full-scale statutory inquiry to figure out how on earth this was allowed to happen. And the case has ignited these urgent calls for major reforms in how hospitals are held accountable, and maybe, most importantly, how to better protect whistleblowers who risk their careers to expose wrongdoing. And all of this leaves us with this one huge, fundamental question that goes way beyond just this one case. The trust between patients and the people who care for them, that's the absolute bedrock of our healthcare system. When that trust is so completely shattered, how can an institution ever hope to rebuild it? That's a question the UK's health service and really healthcare systems all over the world now have to answer.